I never believed a person could truly vanish into thin air until I spent 3 years investigating what happened at the Ugly Tuna Saloona on April 1, 2006. And let me tell you something right now. What I'm about to share with you will challenge everything you think you know about reality, about surveillance, about the impossible becoming horrifyingly real on a spring break night in Columbus, Ohio. Because on that night, a 27-year-old med student named Brian Shaffer walked into a second-floor bar with his friends, got captured on camera one last time at 1:55 a.m., and then simply ceased to exist. Not disappeared. Not ran away. Ceased to exist. And the security footage, the police investigation, the physics of the building itself, none of it, absolutely none of it can explain what happened in the 6 minutes that followed. If you've ever felt watched by cameras everywhere you go, if you've ever thought there's no way to truly vanish in our modern surveillance world, this story will haunt you. Because Brian Shaffer proved that wrong. Or something proved it for him. It was March 31, 2006, and Brian Shaffer was exhausted. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from pulling all-nighters for medical school midterms while your heart is still shattered from losing your mother just 3 weeks earlier. Renee Shaffer had died of cancer on March 6, and Brian, this 6'2" Pearl Jam fanatic with wire-rimmed glasses and dreams bigger than medicine, he was struggling. Really struggling. But spring break had finally arrived, and in just 3 days, Brian and his girlfriend Alexis Wagner would be flying to Miami. A trip his mother had gifted them last Christmas, back when she was still alive, back when the future looked bright and full of possibilities. There were rumors, quiet whispers among friends, that Brian was planning to propose to Alexis on that beach in Miami. A new beginning after so much loss. That Friday evening, Brian met his father Randy for dinner at Outback Steakhouse. It was emotional for Randy, sitting in that booth, because Outback had been Renee's favorite place. And Brian, sensing his father's pain, leaned across the table and said something that would echo in Randy's mind forever after. "It's all right, Dad. I'll be with you as much as I can." Those were the last words Randy Shaffer ever heard from his son. Later that night, around 9:30, Brian's friend William, Clint, Florence drove over to Brian's apartment on King Avenue. The plan was simple, the kind of plan college kids make every weekend, bar hopping in Columbus, blowing off steam, celebrating the end of midterms and the start of spring break. Just 2 buddies hitting the town. Their first stop was the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Now, if you're not familiar with Columbus, let me paint you a picture of this place, because the layout, the architecture of this building, it's crucial to understanding the impossible nature of what happened next. The Ugly Tuna Saloona was located on the 2nd floor of the South Campus Gateway complex on North High Street. You couldn't just walk into this bar from the street. You had to enter the Gateway building, ride an escalator up to the 2nd floor, and then enter the bar entrance, which was basically a single doorway. The bar itself was one large room with a balcony overlooking the Gateway courtyard, and here's what makes this important. At the time, the back area of the building was under construction. Dark corridors, unfinished spaces, the kind of places you don't wander into unless you know exactly where you're going. At 9:56 p.m., while standing outside the Ugly Tuna, Brian pulled out his phone and called Alexis. She was up in Toledo visiting family before their Miami trip, and when she answered, Brian's voice was warm, maybe a little buzzed already, definitely happy. "I love you," he told her. "I can't wait for this trip." She'd remember that phone call for the rest of her life. The last time she heard his voice. But here's something most people don't know about that night. Before Brian and Clint even arrived at the Ugly Tuna, there was tension. According to some reports, never fully confirmed but whispered about in the years since, Brian and Clint had gotten into an argument in the days leading up to this night. Nothing major, or so it seemed, just typical friend drama. But that argument, whatever it was about, it was still hanging in the air between them. After leaving the Ugly Tuna around 10:30, Brian and Clint hit the Short North Tavern for another drink, then moved on to Brothers Bar and Grill, where they met up with Clint's friend Meredith Reed. Now, Meredith and Clint, they were close. Very close. The kind of close where people raised eyebrows and made assumptions. And for the next couple hours, the three of them drank, laughed, did what young people do on a Friday night in a college town. But something was shifting. Something subtle that wouldn't become clear until later. At 1:15 a.m., Meredith offered to drive Brian and Clint back to the Ugly Tuna. They'd been drinking heavily, and she was the responsible one that night, the designated driver. They parked in the South Campus Gateway garage, and here's where the security footage becomes crucial, because from this moment on, every movement is documented. Or at least, it should be. The three of them rode the escalator up to the second floor. The timestamp reads 1:15 a.m. And if you watch that footage, really study it, you can see Brian leaning on the handrail, clearly intoxicated but functional, coherent, alive. Just a guy having a night out with friends. They entered the Ugly Tuna Saloona together. And this is where the story fractures, where the official narrative and the unexplained questions start to diverge into something darker. According to Clint, Brian told him and Meredith around 2 a.m. that he wanted to go talk to the band that was playing that night. Just a casual comment, the kind of thing you say at a bar when you're drunk and the music's good. I'm gonna go chat with the band for a minute. And then Brian walked away, heading toward the stage area. Clint and Meredith didn't follow him. And here's my first question, the one that's bothered me since I started digging into this case. Why? If you go to a bar with one or two friends, you generally stick together, especially late at night when the place is getting ready to close. Why did Brian go off alone? Why didn't Clint or Meredith go with him? What were they doing that was so important they couldn't walk 20 feet with their friend to talk to a band? Unless something else happened. Unless there was another argument, something that made Brian want to get away from them. But that's speculation. What we know for certain is this. At 1:55 a.m., 35 minutes after entering the bar, Brian Shaffer appeared on camera one last time. The footage shows him outside the bar entrance, near the top of the escalator, talking to two young women, Brighton Zatko and Amber Ruick. Amber was actually Clint's teaching assistant, someone who knew both Clint and Brian from their undergraduate days. And if you watch this footage, Brian looks fine. He's smiling, gesturing, clearly in the middle of a conversation. The women are smiling back. It's a normal interaction, nothing sinister, nothing strange. And then Brian says goodbye. He waves. He turns toward the bar entrance, which is just outside the camera's view. And he's never seen again. Not on any camera. Not by any witness. Not ever. When I first watched that footage, I must have replayed it 200 times. Because what happens next, or rather what doesn't happen, it defies logic. It defies the basic laws of physical reality. Brian turns toward the bar. The two women he was talking to, they stay in frame for several more seconds. They don't watch him leave. They don't look in his direction. They just assumed, like everyone would assume, that he walked back into the bar. But here's the thing that'll make your skin crawl. There were cameras inside that bar. Not many, and not high quality by today's standards, but cameras nonetheless. Stationary cameras, manually operated cameras, auto-panning cameras, motion-activated systems. And in the hours that followed Brian's disappearance, investigators reviewed every single frame of footage from every single camera. Brian Shaffer never appears on any of them after 1:55 a.m. According to Clint, he and Meredith started looking for Brian around 2 a.m., just minutes after that last camera sighting. They called his name. They checked the bathrooms. They tried calling his phone. Nothing. No response. And when the bar started closing at 2 a.m., they went outside and waited, figuring maybe Brian had left without telling them, maybe he'd gotten tired and decided to walk home. But here's what the security footage shows at 2:01 a.m., just 6 minutes after Brian's last appearance. Clint and Meredith are captured on camera leaving the bar, riding down the escalator, standing outside with their phones out. You can see them clearly trying to call someone, presumably Brian. His phone went straight to voicemail, because by 2:01 a.m., Brian Shaffer's phone was already turned off, or something had happened that made it impossible for him to answer. Clint later claimed that he drove to Brian's apartment and waited there for 6 hours, thinking maybe Brian had walked home. But Brian never showed up. His bed was untouched. His car was still parked outside. Everything in the apartment was exactly as he'd left it. It wasn't until Sunday, April 2nd, that Alexis Wagner began to panic. She'd been trying to reach Brian all weekend, and every call went straight to voicemail. That wasn't like him. Not 3 days before their Miami trip. Not when he'd told her just Friday night how much he loved her, how excited he was. She drove to his apartment, found his car in the parking lot, found everything normal inside except for one crucial detail. Brian wasn't there. And no one knew where he was. Randy Shaffer, Brian's father, tried to file a missing person report that Sunday. The police refused. They told him to wait, to see if Brian showed up for his flight to Miami on Monday. He's probably just sleeping it off somewhere, they said. College kids do this all the time. But Randy knew. Father's intuition, maybe. Or just the cold certainty that something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. He insisted they start searching immediately. They refused. And that decision, that crucial delay, it might be the reason we're still asking questions 18 years later. Because by the time the police finally took the disappearance seriously, by the time they filed an official report on Monday, April 3rd, after Brian failed to show up for his flight, precious time had been lost. Evidence could have been cleaned up. Trails could have gone cold. And if Brian had been hurt, if he'd been taken somewhere, if he'd had an accident, those first hours were critical. They were wasted. When investigators finally began their work, they started with the obvious, reviewing security footage. And what they found was impossible. Literally impossible. Detective Andre Edwards would later state with absolute certainty, "I can say with 100% certainty that Brian Shaffer did not go back down that escalator." Think about that for a second. 100% certainty. No doubt. No margin for error. The detective is telling you that Brian did not leave the building the way he came in. So how did he leave? The Ugly Tuna Saloona had several potential exits. There was the main entrance where the camera captured Brian's last moments. There was an emergency exit that led to an alley, also monitored by cameras. There was a service door that connected to a hallway with an elevator and stairwell, leading down to a construction area. And there was a trash chute inside the bar. Investigators reviewed footage from all the cameras. The main entrance showed everyone leaving that night except Brian. The emergency exit camera, according to police, showed no one resembling Brian using that door, though that footage was never released publicly, so we're taking their word for it. The service door and construction area became the focus of intense speculation. This wasn't a finished, well-lit corridor. This was a dark, dangerous maze of unfinished construction, the kind of place that would be difficult to navigate even while sober, let alone after a night of heavy drinking. There was a chain across the door, but people had been known to squeeze through the gap. Could Brian have done this? Could he have stumbled into that construction zone, fallen into a shaft or pit, become injured or unconscious, and then been accidentally buried under concrete when work resumed the next day? Detective John Hurst described the construction site as completely dug up, but later clarified that there weren't deep shafts or dangerous drops. The building was already operational, already open. Any remaining construction was minor, cosmetic, interior remodeling. Search dogs were brought in. They tracked Brian's scent from the back of the Gateway building heading south. The dogs alerted to an area in the Wendy's parking lot behind the building, a spot known for being dangerous late at night, where they also picked up the scent of urine and vomit. This tracking suggests Brian did exit the building, that he made it outside. That whatever happened to him, it didn't happen inside the Ugly Tuna Saloona. But if that's true, why is there no camera footage of him leaving? How did he slip past every single surveillance camera in a building that was monitored more heavily than most banks? And here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Brian's phone. That phone that went straight to voicemail at 2:01 a.m. It stayed off all day Saturday, all day Sunday. Monday morning came and went with no activity. But Monday evening, something changed. The Columbus Police Department had activated a pinging service through Singular Wireless, Brian's phone carrier. This service would register signals whenever the phone connected with cell towers. And on Monday evening, Brian's phone suddenly came back online. It pinged a cell tower near Kenny Road and West Lane Avenue in Columbus. Then, over the following days and weeks, it continued pinging towers, creating a pattern of movement. The phone was moving west. Slowly, methodically, westward through Columbus, eventually reaching the Hilliard area, then pinging near Coyote Derby Creek. The pattern was consistent with a phone in a moving vehicle. Someone was traveling with Brian's phone, or someone had found it and was carrying it around. But who? And why would they keep it active? Why not just throw it away? The truly chilling part came 5 months later, in September 2006. Alexis Wagner had been paying Brian's phone bill all those months, hoping against hope that if he was alive somewhere, if this was all some terrible misunderstanding, he might use the phone. Every night around 11:30 p.m., she'd call his number, and every night it went straight to voicemail. Until September 7th, 2006. That night, when Alexis called Brian's number, the phone rang. Not voicemail. It rang 3 or 4 times before going to voicemail. Alexis's blood went cold. She called again. Same result. Ringing. 4 rings. Voicemail. She called her brother. He tried. The phone rang for him too. Alexis immediately contacted the Columbus PD. Randy Shaffer was called. Derek, Brian's brother, started calling the number. Local officers tried it. The phone kept ringing. 4 hours, between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., anyone who called Brian's number would get 4 rings before voicemail. And then, at 8 a.m., it stopped. Back to straight to voicemail. 2 days later, on September 10th, the phone started ringing again, on and off throughout the day. At 8 a.m., at noon, at various times, the phone would ring when called, then go back to voicemail. Singular Wireless explained this away as a computer glitch or a nearby tower being busy. But Alexis and Randy didn't believe that. How do you explain 5 months of silence followed by intermittent ringing, then silence again? How do you explain a phone that's supposedly off suddenly communicating with cell towers? Was Brian alive somewhere, turning his phone on and off? Had someone found the phone and was taunting the family? Or was this something else entirely, something we don't have the technology or understanding to explain? The pings eventually stopped. The phone went silent forever. But those hours when it rang, when someone or something on the other end of that phone was just beyond reach, that's the stuff of nightmares. The investigation continued for months, for years. Everyone who'd been with Brian that night was asked to take polygraph tests. Randy Shaffer took one. Passed. Meredith Reed took one. passed. Clint Florence refused. His attorney, Neil Rosenberg, released a statement. Clint has cooperated with the authorities. Clint does not know the whereabouts or what happened to Brian. The attorney went on to say that if Brian was alive, which the detective had suggested was possible, then it was Brian causing his family pain, not Clint. The polygraph refusal was based on the attorney's recommendation. And legally, that's smart. Polygraphs aren't admissible in court because they're unreliable. Refusing one doesn't prove guilt. But it raised questions, especially when Clint also refused to comply with a grand jury subpoena. Investigators had prepared questions for him. His attorney responded that Clint would take the Fifth Amendment, the right to remain silent. Derek Shaffer, Brian's brother, later said, "I've always thought he definitely knows something, just won't come forward with it." Randy Shaffer wrote letters to both Clint and Meredith, pleading with them to come forward even if they'd promised Brian they wouldn't tell anyone something. Those letters went unanswered. In May 2006, just a month after Brian's disappearance, both Clint and Meredith hired lawyers and stopped giving interviews to police. Clint moved to Tennessee shortly after. Now, I want to be very clear here. The police have never named Clint Florence as a person of interest or suspect. There's no evidence he was involved in Brian's disappearance. His behavior, while suspicious to some, could simply be the actions of someone protecting themselves legally. But the questions remain. What happened in those final minutes before Brian disappeared? Was there an argument inside the bar? Did something occur that made Brian want to leave through a different exit, to avoid being seen by Clint and Meredith? And if so, what was it? There are other theories, darker theories, that have circulated over the years. Some people analyzed the security footage frame by frame and claimed Brian put something in Brighton Zatko's purse during their conversation at 1:55 a.m. Was it his phone? Was it drugs? Was it something else entirely? Brighton never reported finding anything unusual in her purse, so this theory lacks substance. Others focused on various men seen in the footage that night, the so-called orange shirt guy, who was seen entering and exiting multiple times, later confirmed to be a taxi driver. A muscular man in a grey T-shirt positioned near the escalator. Rumors of two brothers who may have been linked to Brian's disappearance. But the police have never confirmed any of these individuals as suspects or persons of interest. Then there's the construction theory I mentioned earlier. The possibility that Brian, drunk and disoriented, somehow made it into that construction zone, fell or crawled into a confined space, a wall cavity, ductwork, an unfinished area, and passed out or died there. That when construction resumed, his body was unknowingly sealed behind concrete or drywall, entombed forever in that building. It's horrifying to think about. But multiple searches of the building, including with cadaver dogs, found nothing. If Brian's body was in that building, the dogs should have alerted to it, unless he was already sealed in concrete by the time they searched. Unless the timing was just wrong enough that the evidence was literally buried before anyone thought to look. The river theory gained traction for a while. The Olentangy River runs through Columbus, about half a mile from Brian's apartment. Randy Shaffer even consulted a psychic who claimed Brian's body was near a bridge pier. Randy, Derek, and volunteers searched the riverbanks but found nothing. Bodies lost in water don't always surface, especially in rivers with slow currents and low-head dams. But the Olentangy isn't particularly deep, and for Brian to end up in the river, he would have had to walk past his apartment, which seems unlikely. Plus, there's that phone evidence. A phone submerged in water would be destroyed, unable to ping towers weeks later. Some people latched onto the smiley face killer theory, a supposed serial killer or group of killers who target young, white, college-aged men near bars and bodies of water. Victims are allegedly found near smiley face graffiti. But Brian's body was never found, making him an outlier. And both local police and the FBI have largely dismissed the smiley face killer theory as unfounded. The voluntary disappearance theory is perhaps the most heartbreaking for Brian's family. The idea that he chose to vanish, that he staged his own disappearance to escape the pain of losing his mother, the pressure of medical school, the weight of everyone's expectations. Brian had talked about wanting to run away, about owning an island someday, drinking margaritas on a beach, playing music instead of practicing medicine. His MySpace page made that clear. This whole doctor thing is really just a job, only temporary, until I get my band together and we put out a record. 3 weeks before his disappearance, he'd asked Alexis to run away with him. Then, days later, told her to move on, that he didn't know when or if he'd get better. There was tension with his father Randy. They'd argued about Renee's life insurance. Randy had recently said he wouldn't cover the rest of Brian's medical school tuition. Brian was carrying $25,000 in credit card debt and never deposited a $4,500 tuition check from Randy. Unverified claims suggested Brian was upset about Randy's romantic involvement before Renee's death, though this has never been confirmed. Brian spoke Spanish. He'd mentioned knowing someone in Puerto Vallarta. With his wallet and photo ID, he could theoretically have flown to a U.S. territory like the Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico without a passport. But here's why that theory falls apart for me. Brian was visibly intoxicated that night, staging a clean, perfectly timed exit from a monitored building, navigating through a construction zone or finding an unmonitored exit, all while drunk, that requires exceptional planning and execution. Brian was close to his brother Derek. He was in a committed relationship with Alexis. They had a trip planned in 3 days. He'd told her he loved her just hours before vanishing. People who voluntarily disappear usually show signs, make preparations. Brian withdrew no money, left no note, took no extra clothing, and in 18 years there's been no credible sighting, no paper trail, no slip-up. Creating and maintaining a new identity, cutting off all ties, never using your phone or credit cards or social security number, that requires discipline Brian hadn't demonstrated. Most tellingly, if Brian had run away, if he'd chosen to disappear, why turn his phone back on months later? Why let it ping towers, creating a trail? Why let it ring when his grieving girlfriend called? That's not the behavior of someone who wants to stay hidden. That's the behavior of someone, or something, toying with the people left behind. After spending years researching this case, after reviewing every piece of evidence, every theory, every witness statement, I've come to a conclusion. And I'll tell you, it's not a comfortable conclusion. It's not one that provides closure or easy answers. But here's what I believe happened. On that night, in those crucial minutes between 1:55 a.m. and 2:01 a.m., Brian Shaffer made a decision. Maybe he was angry. Maybe he'd argued with Clint and Meredith and wanted to avoid them. Maybe he was just drunk and impulsive. But he decided not to leave through the main exit where his friends would see him. He knew Clint and Meredith would be waiting by the escalator, calling him, texting him. So he turned off his phone, and he found another way out. The service door, the one that led to the construction area, to the hallway with the elevator and stairs, the one that wasn't heavily monitored, where the camera could be manually overridden, where the alarm was routinely turned off after business hours. Brian squeezed through that door, maybe retrieving something he'd left earlier, maybe just looking for a quiet exit. He made his way through the dimly lit construction area, down the stairs or elevator, and exited somewhere near the back of the gateway building. The search dogs confirmed this. They tracked his scent from the rear of the building, heading south along Pearl Alley. They alerted near the Wendy's parking lot, where they smelled urine and vomit. The trail continued toward Brian's apartment, which was only a 6 to 8 minute walk away, then went cold. Brian's apartment was 480 meters from the Ugly Tuna. Pearl Alley was the less traveled route, away from the main roads, away from where Clint and Meredith had parked. I believe Brian deliberately chose this path to avoid his friends. And somewhere along that walk, maybe in that parking lot behind Wendy's, maybe a few blocks toward his apartment, Brian encountered someone. Or something happened that he didn't anticipate. That area was known for crime. A slightly intoxicated man walking alone at 2 a.m. is vulnerable. Easy target for robbery, for assault, for something worse. Maybe Brian was attacked. Maybe he tried to defend himself and it escalated. Maybe whoever hurt him panicked, put him in a vehicle, drove west, which would explain those cell phone pings in the days that followed. Maybe Brian's body ended up in one of the many lakes or secluded areas around Columbus. Maybe he's in that landfill in Tennessee, the one where the dumpster behind the Ugly Tuna was emptied before police thought to search it. Or maybe, and this is the possibility that keeps me up at night, maybe something else happened. Something we don't have the framework to understand. Because that phone evidence, those pings, that ringing 5 months later, that doesn't fit neatly into any rational explanation. On September 14, 2008, Randy Shaffer was killed when a tree limb fell on him during a storm. He died never knowing what happened to his son, never getting the closure he desperately needed. In 2013, Brian was legally declared dead, allowing his brother Derek to access family assets. In 2021, an age progression photo was created showing what Brian might look like at 42 years old. It was released to the public, hoping for new leads. Nothing came of it. As of 2024, Brian Shaffer has been missing for 18 years. The Columbus Police Department says the case is periodically reviewed, but there are no new updates. Derek Shaffer still holds out hope, though he admits he no longer believes his brother is alive. Alexis Wagner has moved on with her life, but the questions remain. What happened in those 6 minutes? How does a man disappear from a monitored building with multiple cameras and never appear on a single frame? How does his phone stay active for weeks after he vanishes, pinging towers, moving westward, then suddenly start ringing 5 months later? If Brian Shaffer is dead, where is his body? If he's alive, why hasn't he contacted his family in 18 years? And if something else happened, something beyond our understanding of reality, then what does that mean for the rest of us? Because here's the thing that haunts me most about this case. It's not just that Brian disappeared. It's that the disappearance was perfect. Too perfect. Every exit monitored except the one he somehow used. Every camera working except in the crucial moment. Every witness present except when it mattered. It's as if Brian Shaffer was erased. Not killed. Not kidnapped. Erased. And somewhere in Columbus, Ohio, maybe in a construction zone now sealed behind walls, maybe at the bottom of a river, maybe in a landfill in Tennessee, maybe in a dimension we can't perceive, Brian Shaffer still exists in that liminal space between being and non-being. Schrödinger's missing person. Simultaneously alive and dead until someone finally opens the box and looks inside. But no one has. And maybe no one ever will. If you have any information about Brian Shaffer's disappearance, contact the Columbus Police Department at 614-645-4545. Even if it seems trivial. Even if it happened 18 years ago and you're not sure it matters. It matters. Because Derek Shaffer deserves to know what happened to his brother. Alexis deserves closure. And Brian, wherever he is, whatever happened to him, he deserves to be found. If this story disturbed you, if you've spent any time in a bar or building with cameras and wondered how someone could truly vanish, drop the word "vanished" in the comments below. And if you've ever experienced something that defied logical explanation, something that made you question the nature of reality itself, I want to hear about it. Because Brian Shaffer's case isn't just a missing person story. It's a glitch in the matrix. It's proof that even in our modern surveillance state, even with all our technology and investigation techniques, there are still mysteries that refuse to be solved. And maybe that's what terrifies us most. Not that bad things can happen, but that they can happen and leave absolutely no trace. No evidence. No explanation. Just a young man smiling and waving on camera at 1:55 a.m., turning toward a doorway and stepping into oblivion.